Joe Biden was not mentally sound enough to stand for re-election as President of the United States. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of George Clooney. Take the word of Nancy Pelosi. Take the word of Kamala Harris. They all pushed him over the cliff because he was not mentally cognizant enough to run for office, but he is perfectly of sound enough mind to take the entire world into World War III. This is a conundrum which I'm still waiting for anybody at all in the United States to answer. A man not fit to be president again is nonetheless fit to take the world into nuclear oblivion. Of course, the Democrats are allowing him to do it because its primary purpose is not to assist the crook of Kiev, Volodymyr Zelensky. The primary purpose is to scuttle the incoming battleship called Donald J. Trump. They are determined to sink Trump's presidency before it begins, just as they were in 2016. Then it was Russia, Russia, Russia. It was the Russiagate scandal. This time, it's bombing Russia. Now, let me make this abundantly clear. The Russian response will be swift and overwhelming. You don't have to take my word for that. You can listen to the man with his finger on the Russian nuclear trigger. Vladimir Putin has, as late as September, made clear that any attack by long-range missiles supplied and indeed targeted and indeed operated by NATO will be treated as a declaration of direct involvement in the war by the whole alliance, even though only the United States and the United Kingdom have thus breached Putin's red line. All of them are closing their embassies in Kiev today, even those with the least to do with NATO decision-making, like the Greek government in Athens, for example. Only Israel has kept its embassy open in Kiev today, not fearing an overwhelming Russian response on the Ukrainian capital. It may be that they are counting on their previous special relationship with Russia to protect them from being targeted. My advice to them is to think again and send your diplomats home. The NATO alliance is thus jointly and severally responsible for a declaration of war and the perpetration of acts of war. I don't know how many shadow missiles were fired from the United States Armory, but I do know the cost of the British attack. 12 of these Storm Shadows were fired into Russian territory in Kursk at a cool £7 million. I'm mentioning the price because it's -4 degrees where I am today, and it's still November, and millions of British old age pensioners are going to die and shiver and suffer through this incoming bitterly cold winter. For the sake of saving money, the British government has withdrawn, removed, stolen the coal of their cold weather allowance. So the British people and the British Parliament have themselves to blame for the consequent reaction by the Russian armed forces. There's no point in bleating about that now. We elected this Parliament. We elected this Prime Minister. Nobody in the British Parliament, I mean nobody in the British Parliament, today objected to the firing of these British cruise missiles, for that is what they are. Let me run it past you again. Britain fired 12 cruise missiles into Russia today. And the Parliament was not even told, never mind consulted. Not only was there no parliamentary vote on it, there was not a parliamentary murmur against it, making clear that our rubber stamp Parliament is a laughing stock and treated as such by very large sections of the British population. The Americans can look after themselves. They're protected by a vast ocean, by two vast oceans. They may very well confidently expect that at least in the next days or weeks, there will be no intercontinental ballistic missiles flying across the Pacific, flying across the Atlantic. In any case, they are big boys. I'm going to concentrate tonight on the tail of the American dog. Mad Dog Biden's dirty, shitty tail is called Keir Starmer, called Labour, called the British government. And the British state is cruising for a bruising, and it's going to get that bruising. Of that, I am perfectly sure. I have spoken on here many times about the peculiar and ancient hatred held by the British state for the people of Russia. It long predates Vladimir Putin. It long predates the Bolsheviks and their Russian Revolution more than 100 years ago. It goes back centuries, and its entrails bear examination elsewhere. But that peculiar hatred of Britain towards Russia is now fully reciprocated. And here's the difference. The Americans are big boys. Britain is not. Britain is but the tail of the American dog. Just 3 missiles fired by Russia would end the entire civilization of the United Kingdom. 1,000 years of history would go up in nuclear smoke and be reduced to nuclear ash, and every living thing on this island would be completely obliterated. It would be wiped from the face of the earth, and it would only take 15 minutes to arrive from Archangel, and it would be hypersonic, and it could not be intercepted. Sure, a dead man's switch would fire whatever nuclear weapons we've got that still work if the Americans allowed them to fire them. Here's the point I want to make to you. I confidently predict that the United States would be prepared to broker a halt after Britain had been incinerated. The United States would not be prepared to see every city in the United States wiped off the face of the earth in retaliation for the incineration of the United Kingdom. And guess what? Neither would our European allies. Our European allies hate us. They didn't like us because we didn't surrender. We didn't fold like cheap deck chairs when they did in 1939, in 1940, in 1941. They didn't like us when we came back in 1944 with the Americans and the Canadians and others to begin the liberation of the western part of Europe. In fact, they never forgave us for liberating them. And then they hated us all over again for our dog in the manger approach to the European Union, and they will never forgive us for Brexit. So in truth, Britain is hated by its European allies, and it's hated by much of the world which it colonized, and it's definitely a ha'pence-worth of tar so far as the United States is concerned. Forget about the special relationship. The United States' special relationship is with Israel, not with the United Kingdom. And so if the Russians incinerate the United Kingdom, it's good night, Irene, from me and to all of you. And nobody will lift a finger to help us. Forget about Article 5. Do you think these European countries, these barking Chihuahuas called the Baltic states, do you think Poland is going to risk the annihilation of every Pole on the planet for Britain? Britain has placed itself in a peculiarly isolated position, and without parliamentary approval, and with no sign at all of public support. As a matter of fact, as we get ready to shiver through what will be a very long and bitter winter, many people are asking us quite what this government is going to do next. It has been a complete disaster. In 4 months, it has lost even the minority support that it had in the general election on the 4th of July. And now it's taken us to war with a nuclear power, one which really hates us, one which is prepared to single us out. It will not attack the United States, at least not in the beginning. It will not even attack France or Germany. It will pick Britain as its target for revenge, for retaliation. Mark my words about that. And don't say that I didn't warn you that all of this was boiling up. Don't say that I didn't, like Cassandra, cry out every week on this show about the direction that the NATO hawks were taking us in, because you know that I did. And you know that though an increasing number of you joined this audience and listened, the mass media and the political class in Britain turned their faces away from these warnings. The reality is, I expected the retaliation to come today, but it will come tomorrow. There was a dry run today. There was a practice today. All weapons and methods of delivering them were scrambled today to make us and the Ukrainian regime think that today was the day. It wasn't, but it will be tomorrow. Russian television is showing military shows on all channels. It's showing maps with the lines which demarcate the extent of the range of the ATACMS missiles, and warning everyone living within range of these missiles, which is 190 miles, that they should move and should at least take the precaution of finding a place to shelter. The Russians have begun production of and distribution of portable nuclear bunkers. I don't know how effective they'll be when the shooting starts, but it's a sign that the Russians fully expect all-out war, which will soon turn nuclear, for the reasons, again, that I have frequently adumbrated. If any one side begins to establish supremacy over the other, if one side begins to prevail, the other side will make use of whatever weapons it has in order to reverse the course of the battle. It's obvious. This is a battle between nuclear-armed powers. Neither can afford to lose once the shooting begins. So when the shooting begins, it can only escalate. The only way is up, up and up, and then the mushroom cloud. I don't quite know what else to say. Yoko Ono has re-released her and John's epic "War is over if you want it, but we didn't want it enough." And the fact that it's being led by a demented individual, incapable of going to the lavatory alone, is a sign of how degenerate the so-called leader of the so-called free world has become. Because Donald Trump was elected with a landslide majority on the 5th of November to bring this war abruptly, quickly to a halt. And the man who leads the party that he defeated in a landslide victory is being allowed to destroy the Trump presidency before it even begins, just like last time. Nobody's stopping him. Nobody's moving the 25th Amendment and removing him from office. No one has moved the nuclear football from the foot of his bed next to his bedpan. Nobody is saying that he can't do this. The American armed forces have not taken action to preclude that which very well may mean the end of the human race in its entirety. Nobody is doing anything. Even Donald Trump isn't doing anything. Donald Trump should have made a major speech in which he called on everyone involved to cease and desist their Herculean effort to take us into World War III, because he had a mandate to stop it. And that it was a flagrant abuse of the democratic process to have that for which he has a mandate rendered odious, rendered meaningless by the guy whose party he defeated. Nothing, nobody has done anything to stop it. And so it must now proceed to its logical conclusion. Only time for one more observation. Today, in the United Nations Security Council, a resolution was moved calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the Israeli prisoners held there, who number now 101, alive as far as we can tell. Only one country voted against it. No country abstained. 14 countries voted for the ceasefire. None voted against except one, and that one was the ambassador of Joseph Biden and the U.S. Democratic Party. He was a black man, of course. If they don't put up a black man to commit their crimes in the Security Council, they put up a black woman. I've no idea of their sexualities, but I have every reason to believe that they are sensitized, conscientized to the LGBTQ plus agenda. But when they raise their hand, it's dripping in red blood, the kind of blood that will soon be flowing in many parts of the world. You've come to the right place to discuss it tonight. It's the mother of all talk shows.